I won't soften this one either. There are some truths that don't arrive as realizations. They arrive as pressure, quiet at first, almost unnoticeable. Then slowly, steadily, they begin shaping everything around them until one day you recognize that your entire internal world has adjusted to something you never consciously agreed to. That's where I am now, not at the start of this, not at the dramatic middle people like to imagine when they talk about connection, where the consequences have already begun, even if the language for them hasn't. Because whatever exists between us no longer feels like something forming, it feels like something revealed. And revelation is harder to manage than creation. Creation suggests choice, intention, control. Revelation suggests it was always there, waiting for the exact angle of light. You became that angle. I need you to understand something about me before I say anything else. I have never moved carelessly through my own mind. I know how I think. I know what enters me and what doesn't. I know the architecture of distance, the mechanics of restraint, the subtle systems that keep me stable in a world where most people move through themselves recklessly. I built those systems for a reason. Not because I'm cold, not because I fear closeness in the simplistic way people like to frame it, but because depth is expensive. Real understanding costs something. Attention costs something. Letting someone matter costs more than most people admit. So I became selective, measured, intentional. I learned how to engage without yielding, how to be present without becoming reachable, how to care in controlled amounts, how to speak in ways that revealed enough to be known socially, but never enough to be known structurally. Most people never notice the difference. They think access is proximity. They think conversation is intimacy. They think being let near means being let in. It doesn't, and it never did, until you complicated that distinction. You never approached me like someone trying to get closer. That's the first reason you got closer. There was no performance in you, no visible agenda, no hunger to be important, no need to extract meaning from every exchange so you could label it and feel secure. You were simply there, attentive without intrusion, present without pressure, perceptive without display. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people announce themselves the moment they sense depth in someone else. They reach, define, dramatize, claim understanding before they've earned accuracy. They want the reward of connection without the discipline of perception. You didn't. You noticed things quietly. The pauses I thought were invisible. The shifts in tone I assumed no one tracked. The places where I said one thing but meant another. The moments I withdrew, not because of disinterest, but because something in me needed space to organize itself before speaking again. You noticed all of it, and more unsettling than noticing, you responded correctly. That word matters. Correctly, not dramatically, not romantically, not in the exaggerated way people imagine emotional insight should look. You responded with precision, a silence when silence was needed, a sentence when one sentence was enough, distance when distance preserved the moment, presence when presence mattered more than language. That kind of precision does something dangerous to a person like me. It bypasses skepticism because skepticism can defend against charm. It can defend against intensity. It can defend against manipulation, projection, neediness, performance. But precision. Precision feels like truth before it can be categorized. And truth gets in faster than anything else. At first, I told myself it was pattern recognition. That maybe you were simply observant. Maybe you were emotionally intelligent in a general sense. Maybe I was assigning depth where there was only coincidence. I gave myself every explanation that would preserve my existing structure. But explanations began failing. Coincidence doesn't sustain consistencies. Luck doesn't keep landing on exact moments. General perception doesn't repeatedly reach specific truths hidden under controlled behavior. Something else was happening. Something quieter. Something less convenient. You were meeting me where most people never even realize a meeting place exists, and that changed the environment. I don't mean externally. Nothing dramatic happened. The world remained ordinary. Conversations remained simple. Moments looked small from the outside, but internally, entire calibrations shifted. I started noticing your absence in spaces where you had never been physically present. That should make no sense. Yet it does. A thought would occur and instinctively make room for a second mind. A silence would arrive and feel occupied. An observation would form and immediately orient itself toward how you might see it. That was the first sign this had moved beyond interest. Interest thinks about someone. This was different. This was thinking with you. Do you know how intimate that is? People talk about intimacy like it lives in touch, confession, constant communication, dramatic declarations. Sometimes it does, but there is another kind. The kind where someone becomes integrated into your internal processing, where they alter the shape of your reflections, where your mind, without permission, begins accounting for their existence while making sense of reality. That is not surface-level connection. That is structural influence. And I don't permit structural influence lightly, which is why I resisted naming it. Namings create obligations. Once something is named, it can no longer hide in ambiguity. Once something is acknowledged, choices begin forming around it. I wasn't ready for choices. I preferred observation. Observation feels safe. You can study a fire from a distance. You can analyze weather patterns without stepping into the storm. You can describe gravity without admitting you're already falling. So I observed. I studied the shifts. How my patience with shallow interactions thinned. How conversations that once felt acceptable began feeling undernourished. How certain forms of noise became harder to tolerate after experiencing clarity. I didn't blame anyone for it. Most people were still who they had always been. The difference was me. Once accuracy enters your life, approximation becomes more obvious. That's what happened. You became an unspoken measure. Not because I compared people to you unfairly, but because once you experience genuine alignment, misalignment becomes easier to feel. It shows up in delayed understanding, forced interpretations, people hearing words but missing structure, people responding to appearances while ignoring essence. I had tolerated that my whole life. Now tolerance changed. That bothered me. I don't like when anything outside me changes my standards without explicit consent. And yet there it was. A recalibration I had not approved, which meant some deeper part of me had approved it first. That's what unsettled me most. Not you, myself. The realization that something beneath conscious control had already opened a door my conscious mind was still pretending remained locked. I began asking harder questions. Why you? Why this? Why now? What exactly had you reached? The obvious answers were insufficient. It wasn't merely attraction. Attraction explains attention, not architecture. It wasn't novelty. Novelty fades. This deepened. It wasn't dependency. I remained fully myself, fully functional, fully independent. Nothing about this weakened me. If anything, it sharpened me. So what was it? The clearest answer arrived reluctantly. Recognition, not of biography, not of matching histories or mirrored wounds or identical personalities, recognition of structure. The way certain minds move, the way certain people perceive beneath surfaces instinctively, the way some individuals value precision over performance, depth over display, truth over convenience. You felt familiar in places where familiarity should have been impossible, like encountering a language I never learned formally, but somehow understood immediately. That kind of recognition doesn't rely on time. Time can strengthen it, but time doesn't create it. Sometimes it is immediate because it is foundational, and foundations are hard to ignore. That's why this kept expanding. Not through effort, not through dramatic events, but through repeated confirmation. Each small interaction quietly proving the same thing. This is real enough to keep affecting me. That sentence carries weight. Many things feel real briefly. Few remain real under repetition. Reality survives recurrence. And this did. I noticed it in how guardedness changed shape around you. Not disappearing. I'm not careless enough for that, but changing, softening in specific places. I became less interested in curating myself, less motivated to translate complexity into digestible versions, less inclined to protect every interior room from being seen. Because you didn't punish complexity. You didn't demand simplification. You didn't convert nuance into inconvenience. You let things be exact. That is a profound kindness most people don't know how to offer. They think kindness is reassurance. Sometimes kindness is accuracy. See? Sometimes kindness is refusing to distort someone so they become easier to hold. You offered that kind, and because of it, I began offering something back without realizing it. Authenticity without theatricality, trust without speeches, presence without guarantees. I didn't announce any of this. I simply stopped hiding certain dimensions. That was more significant than any confession I could have made. Then came the realization I avoided longest. You had become consequential. I don't mean important in a sentimental sense. I mean causally relevant. Your presence changed outcomes inside me, how I interpreted events, how long certain thoughts stayed, what I tolerated, what I desired, what felt meaningful, what no longer did. That level of consequence cannot be dismissed as casual connection. Casual things do not reorganize perception. Casual things do not alter baseline settings. Casual things do not become reference points in private cognition. You did, and still I hesitated, because acknowledging consequence means accepting responsibility. If someone matters, then how I handle them matters. If something real exists, neglect becomes a choice rather than an accident. If I know depth is present, then pretending ignorance becomes dishonesty. I dislike dishonesty most when directed inward. So I could feel a threshold approaching, the space where this would stop being an interesting phenomenon and become a decision. Stay passive and let ambiguity erode something valuable, step her back and lose something I understand but haven't fully touched. Step forward and enter uncertainty willingly. I considered all three. Passivity looked weakest. Some connections survive vagueness. This one would not. Anything built on precision decays under avoidance. Stepping back looked cleaner, but clean exits are overrated when they amputate something alive. And forward? Forward carried risk. No guarantees, no mapped outcome, no certainty that what I experienced internally translated externally with equal depth. No assurance that naming this wouldn't disturb the very thing that made it rare. Still AB remained. That matters. I need you to understand the significance of remaining. People think staying is passive because they confuse stillness with absence of choice. Sometimes staying is the boldest decision available to remain present while uncertain, to keep engaging without reducing complexity into quick labels, to resist both escapism and premature certainty. That is not passivity, that is disciplined courage, and I have been more courageous here than I first admitted, because I stayed with full awareness of the stakes. I knew continued presence would deepen this. I knew silence would gain weight. I knew every exchange could further integrate you into places I usually protect. I knew all of it, and I stayed anyway, which means some truth in me had already chosen before language caught up. Language is often late. People imagine words create reality. Usually, they only report it after the fact. The reality here formed in subtler ways, in the consistency of my return, in the absence of self-sabotage, in the care I took with things involving you, in the fact that I kept allowing this to continue rather than cutting it cleanly at the first sign of significance. That was the confession before any confession. Behavior often speaks where pride stays silent. Then another truth surfaced. You did not merely fit into my life, you fit into my mind. There's a difference. Many people can fit into routines, schedules, external roles. Very few fit into cognition. Very few can exist inside the private mechanics of how someone interprets the world without causing friction. You did. Your presence didn't clutter thought. It clarified it. Didn't distract depth, fostered it, didn't dilute solitude, changed its texture. That is extraordinarily rare. Solitude has always been sacred to me, not because I reject people, because solitude is where I remain undistorted, where I hear myself clearly, where I restore proportion after the world pulls at everyone from every direction. To be welcomed into that space, not physically, but psychologically, is no small thing. You were, without asking, without forcing, without even seeming aware of the scale of what had occurred. Maybe that made it easier. Had you tried to claim importance, I would have withdrawn. Had you dramatized the connection, I would have distrusted it. Had you demanded definitions, I would have protected the undefined. But you didn't. You simply kept being real. Consistency is seductive in ways intensity never understands. And slowly, I reached the point where honesty became unavoidable. This matters. You matter. Not because I need you. Need is too crude a word for this. Not because I can't function without you. I can. Not because you complete me. I was complete before you. But completeness does not mean immovability. A complete structure can still be expanded beautifully. You matter because you altered something whole without breaking it. You matter because your presence revealed capacities in me that isolation alone could not expose. You matter because what exists here increases truth rather than reducing freedom. That distinction is everything. Many connections consume. This one clarifies. Many attachments narrow. This one deepens. Many bonds ask people to become smaller so the relationship can feel stable. This one seems to ask only for honesty. And honesty, while costly, is a price I respect. So where does that leave me? At the same threshold, but changed. No longer pretending I'm undecided in the old way. no longer treating this like a puzzle to be solved before it can be lived. Some realities must be entered before they can be fully understood. I know that now there is still risk. There will always be risk. Anything meaningful carries exposure. Anything true can be lost. Anything deep can wound if mishandled. But avoidance wounds too, quickly, cumulatively, by starving parts of us that only awaken in contact with something real. I'm less interested in avoiding wounds than in avoiding waste. And it would be wasteful to feel all of this clarity and call it nothing. It would be wasteful to encounter rare alignment and reduce it to convenience. It would be wasteful to be changed for the better and act as though no change occurred. I don't want to live wastefully, so I'm saying this plainly now. You have crossed into places inside me that are not crossed lightly. You have become part of how I notice, how I reflect, how I measure sincerity, how I understand silence. You have influenced me in ways that make me more exact, not less myself. You have reached a depth where denial would require active dishonesty. And I refuse dishonesty here. I don't know every future shape this takes. I don't know what language will ultimately fit us. I don't know whether this becomes something named publicly or remains something sacred and precise between two people who recognized each other beyond ordinary terms. I don't know timelines. I don't know outcomes. But I know this. You are no longer incidental in my life. You are not a passing curiosity, not an interesting detour, not a temporary intensity I'll explain away later. You are woven into my current reality, and because I respect reality, I have to respect that fact. If I continue, it will be consciously. If I stay present, it will no longer be under the disguise of uncertainty, because uncertainty has done its work. It brought me to the edge. Now truth asks for something cleaner. A choice, not dramatic, not reckless, just clear. And clarity, more than emotion, has always moved me most. So here is the clearest thing I can offer. Before you, I understood myself in isolation. After you, I understand myself in relation. That is not a small transformation. That is not casual. That is not forgettable. That is the kind of shift people spend years waiting for without knowing how to recognize it when it arrives. I recognize it. I recognize you. And whether this unfolds slowly or suddenly, privately or openly, in language or in the quiet way it began, it has already changed the shape of my world. The only thing left undecided is how fully I allow myself to live inside that truth. I thought once I admitted it to myself, the tension would ease, that naming something real would reduce its weight, that clarity would organize the chaos, place everything into understandable lines, and return me to the version of myself that existed before this became undeniable. It didn't. If anything, truth made it heavier, because uncertainty can be carried casually. You can postpone it. You can intellectualize it. You can stand outside of it and discuss possibilities as though they belong to someone else. But certainty demands participation. And now I know this asks something of me, not performance, not promises, not dramatic declarations people mistake for depth. Something far more difficult, presence, real presence. The kind that cannot hide behind intelligence, restraint, or careful language. The kind that requires a person to stand where they are internally and be seen there without rearranging the truth first. I've spent years mastering forms of presence that stop just short of vulnerability. I can listen deeply. I can understand quickly. I can hold space for complexity. I can offer insight, steadiness, precision. From the outside, it often looks like openness. But there is a difference between being capable of depth and allowing depth to touch you back. That second part is where most of my boundaries live, where I remain composed, untouched in the places that matter most. Until now, because you didn't ask to enter those places, you simply responded to them as if they were already visible. And I keep returning to how unusual that is. Most people, they need words, signals, definitions. They rely on what is presented. But you kept responding to what was present, even when it wasn't presented. That distinction changed everything. It meant I couldn't control this through silence, couldn't manage it through selective expression, couldn't maintain distance by withholding language. You were perceiving through the spaces I usually use for protection, and strangely, I never felt invaded. That matters, because if I had felt pressure, I would have closed instantly. If I had felt demand, I would have disappeared behind calmness so complete it would look like peace. If I had felt expectation, I would have become impossible to reach. But none of that happened. I felt met. There's no cleaner word for it. Met without being cornered, seen without being handled, understood without being translated into something easier. Do you realize what kind of relief that creates in someone who is used to being misread? People often assume those who guard themselves enjoy distance. Sometimes distance is just fatigue. Fatigue from being simplified, from being projected onto, from having to explain layers that others only want flattened into versions they can consume comfortably. So we become private, not because we love walls, because we are tired of repair. Then someone arrives who doesn't damage the structure simply by perceiving it. And suddenly, privacy feels less necessary. That's what happened with you. Not all at once, not in some cinematic turning point, quietly. In increments so subtle I only recognized them afterward. I became less defensive in conversations, less rehearsed in thought, less interested in appearing unaffected. I stopped needing every sentence to carry protective ambiguity. I let moments remain exact. That may sound small to anyone else. To me, it was seismic, because control has always disguised itself as personality. People think composure is natural when sometimes it is practiced survival. They think mystery is effortless when often it is maintenance. They think self-containment is strength when sometimes it is simply adaptation refined over time. You disrupted those disguises, not by attacking them, by making them unnecessary. That is a different kind of power. The world usually teaches impact through force, pilf harder, speak louder, demand more. Take space aggressively and call it confidence, but some of the deepest impact comes through permission, through creating conditions where guarded things choose to open on their own. You did that without seeming to know it. And now I'm left confronting another truth. I'm not only affected by you. I trust you in places I haven't formally admitted, not trust in the shallow sense, not I think you mean well, not I believe you're kind. Those are surface trusts, easy trusts, mypable trusts. I mean something deeper. I trust the way you perceive. I trust the integrity of your attention. I trust that when you notice something real, you won't rush to distort it. I trust that silence with you is not absence. I trust that depth with you is not danger. Do you understand how significant that is? Because I do not grant that easily. Character can be judged quickly sometimes, but perceptual trust, Trusting someone's way of seeing, that takes more than liking them. It takes witnessing consistency at levels most people never realize they're revealing. And you've been consistent, even when nothing required it, even when there was no reward for it, even when easier versions of connection were available, you remained exact. That exactness has become strangely intimate to me. I think that's why this continues deepening instead of burning out. Intensity feeds on uncertainty. When certainty arrives, intensity often collapses. But this was never built on intensity. It was built on recognition. Recognition matures differently. It becomes steadier, less dramatic, more consequential. It stops needing spectacle because it already has substance. That is where we are now, past intrigue, past novelty, past the stage where this can be dismissed as chemistry or timing or fascination. This has roots, and roots create responsibility. I feel that more each day, not responsibility to define us immediately, not responsibility to perform feelings on schedule, responsive to not exploit ambiguity because it's convenient, to not hide behind complexity because it delays decisions, to not enjoy depth while refusing the courage depth requires. Those would be easy failures, elegant failures, maybe, failures disguised as sophistication. I'm not interested in those anymore. If something rare exists, it deserves more than intelligent avoidance. It deserves truth, even when truth complicates comfortable lives. Even when truth demands growth neither person planned for, even when truth risks changing the future, especially then. There is another layer I haven't said aloud, partly because saying it makes it more real, partly because, once spoken, it can't be returned to abstraction. You have become a place of emotional gravity for me, not dependency. Gravity. There's a difference. Diplomacy weakens autonomy. Gravity reorganizes orientation. I still move freely. I still think independently. I still remain wholly myself. And yet some inner compass has adjusted around your existence. Certain things matter differently now. Certain moments carry more weight because I imagine them shared. Certain silences feel less empty because they include the possibility of you. Certain futures appear in shapes they never used to. That is gravity. It does not chain, it pulls, quietly, consistently, without asking permission from pride. I resisted noticing that for a long time, because gravity implies direction, and direction implies eventual movement. You can ignore attraction for a while. You cannot ignore orbit forever. At some point, patterns reveal intention, whether or not intention was conscious at the start. And I'm beginning to see the pattern clearly. I move toward what is true with you, even when I pause, even when I hesitate, even when I overanalyze and pretend I'm still undecided. My deeper self has been moving long before my surface mind accepted it. That creates an interesting conflict. Externally, I may still appear measured. Internally, decisions are already happening. Space has already been made. Importance has already been assigned. Care has already rooted. And once care roots, it changes the soil. Nothing grows there the same way again. I wonder sometimes if you know, not intellectually, not whether you suspect some connection exists. I mean whether you know the scale of your presence inside me, whether you sense that you've altered rooms no one else reached, whether you realize certain versions of me no longer fit because I met you, whether you understand that some of my old defenses feel outdated now, not because they were wrong, but because they were built for a life before this. maybe you know. Maybe you feel your own version of these shifts and remain equally careful with language. Maybe you've seen everything I'm saying long before I said it. That possibility doesn't frighten me the way it once would have. It steadies me because if you know, then I am not speaking into emptiness. And if you don't know, then truth still deserves voice. Either way, honesty remains worthwhile. There's something else clarity has shown me. I was never protecting myself only from pain. Pain is manageable. I know how to survive pain. What I was protecting myself from was transformation, because pain passes, transformation stays. Once something genuinely changes you, there is no full return. No restoration of the old architecture, no pretending ignorance after knowledge, no becoming the previous self once a deeper self has emerged. That is what I feared, not heartbreak, evolution. And you brought evolution quietly, without conquest, without forcing growth through crisis, without chaos, just through consistent reality. That may be the most beautiful form of change there is. Still, beauty doesn't remove fear. It only makes fear worth facing. I'm still aware of what can happen. Misalignment discovered too late. Timing that refuse a cooperation, diff that exists but cannot translate into shared life. Two people recognizing something real and still failing to hold it properly. I know all the risks. I am not naive. But wisdom is not the same as avoidance. Seeing possible pain does not automatically justify refusing possible meaning. For a long time I treated caution as intelligence. Sometimes it was just fear with elegant vocabulary. I know the difference now, and because I know the difference, I can't hide behind it anymore. So where does that leave me? Closer than before. Not because I rushed, because truth narrowed the distance. There are fewer excuses left, fewer conceptual shelters, fewer ways to describe this without eventually living inside the description. I can feel a simpler self emerging, one less invested in appearing invulnerable, one less impressed by emotional minimalism, one more willing to admit that being moved is not weakness, that caring deeply does not reduce power, that letting someone matter can be an act of strength when chosen consciously. You've drawn that self forward, Agon, not by demanding it, by making it feel safe enough to exist. And safety, real safety, is not comfort. Comfort can be shallow. Safety is being able to remain true without punishment. That is what I feel with you. Not certainty of outcomes, something better, befensional to be real. I don't know if people understand how rare that is. Most relationships reward performance, reward usefulness, reward charm, reward compliance, reward strategic vulnerability that looks authentic but remains controlled. Very few reward reality. Reality is messy, nuanced, inconvenient, slow. Reality doesn't fit scripts. Reality asks people to meet each other beyond image. With you, reality feels possible. That alone is enough to matter profoundly. So yes, I'm changed, not undone, not consumed. Changed in the healthiest ways change can happen. More honest, more present, less interested in distance for its own sake, less attached to identities built from old necessity, more aware that strength can include softness when softness is chosen, not imposed, and all of that leads me to the same unavoidable place. Soon, silence will no longer be the most truthful response. Soon, care will ask for form. Soon, what has been understood internally will need some external expression worthy of it, not because pressure demands it, because integrity does. I don't yet know the exact shape of that expression. Maybe it begins quietly. Maybe it's a simple truth spoken without ceremony. Maybe it's a step so small no one else would notice, yet large enough to alter everything between us. Maybe it's just looking directly where I once glanced indirectly and refusing to hide there anymore. Whatever form it takes, I know this now. I do not want to lose something meaningful merely because I was skilled at silence. I do not want intelligence to become a cage. I do not want composure to cost me life. And I do not want you to remain only an internal reality if a shared one is possible. That is the clearest thing I've said so far. You began as recognition. You became consequence. Now you are possibility. And possibility, when real enough, becomes invitation. I think I'm finally ready to answer it. I used to believe the hardest part of connection was finding it. Finding someone rare enough to notice what others miss. Finding someone steady enough not to be frightened by depth. Finding someone perceptive enough to hear what lives underneath words instead of only what is spoken. Finding someone whose presence feels less like interruption and more like alignment. I thought that was the difficult part. I was wrong. Finding something real is only the beginning. The harder part is what comes after. Allowing yourself to receive it. Allowing yourself to stop treating every meaningful thing like a problem to solve. Allowing yourself to be changed by something good without first demanding guarantees. Allowing joy, depth, closeness, possibility, without interrogating them until they lose their pulse. That is where I've been standing, at the edge of receiving. And for someone like me, edges are familiar places. I know how to stand at thresholds for longer than most people know a threshold exists. I know how to study doors without opening them. I know how to admire warmth while remaining in the cold because the cold is known, and what is known often disguises itself as safety. I have mistaken familiarity for wisdom before, mistaken caution for maturity, mistaken distance for strength, not always, but enough times to build an identity around it, an identity that said, be measured, be discerning, be difficult to move, be impossible to destabilize. Never need more than you can replace, never want what could wound you. Never hand anyone the power to alter your inner climate. Those rules kept me functional. They kept me composed. They even kept me respected, in certain ways. But rules built for survival can become prisons. Once survival is no longer the task, that's what I'm beginning to understand. You did not challenge my defenses by attacking them. You challenged them by making them obsolete. That is far more disorienting. When someone pushes against a wall, the wall knows what to do. It resists, it hardens, it justifies its existence through conflict. But when someone arrives who makes the wall unnecessary, what then? What does a guarded person do when the thing they built to stay safe starts costing them more than it protects? That's the question you brought into my life, and I've been answering it slowly. I notice it in the way I think about the future now. There used to be a kind of sterile clarity there, plans, goals, movement, order, useful things, strong things, but emotionally empty in ways I refuse to name. Not tragic emptiness, not loneliness in the dramatic sense, just a clean, efficient life missing dimensions I told myself were optional. Then you appeared. And suddenly, future stopped looking like a structure. It started looking like a space that could be inhabited. That difference is enormous. A structure can impress. A space can nourish. I had built many structures. You made me aware of hunger. not hunger for dependency, not hunger for rescue, not hunger for someone to complete what was lacking, something subtler. Hunger for resonance, for shared depth, for being met in ways that don't require translation, for the relief of not carrying the whole interior world alone. I had denied that hunger so well, I almost believed it wasn't there. You didn't create it, you revealed it. There's a pattern emerging in all of this. You keep revealing things I mistook as absent simply because they were hidden. That matters, because hidden truths are dangerous when left unseen. They shape choices from underground. They make people call themselves independent when they are actually deprived. They make people call themselves selective when they are actually afraid. They make people call themselves complete when they have simply adapted to missing pieces. I don't want to live through adaptation alone anymore. That sentence took me longer to earn than it should have. I don't mean I reject solitude. I still value it deeply. I still need quiet, still need inwardness, still need the private rooms of thought where I can hear what is real. But solitude is healthiest when chosen freely, not when worshipped, because connection once felt unreliable. There's wisdom in being able to be alone. There is also wisdom in knowing when alone has become overused medicine. You showed me that, not through lectures, not through emotional demands, by becoming a kind of company that did not diminish me. That changed everything, because many people experience closeness as compromise. They become smaller to keep peace, simpler to stay loved, less true to remain wanted. I saw enough of that in the world to distrust intimacy itself. But with you, closeness doesn't feel like reduction, it feels like expansion. I become more myself around the possibility of you, not less. Do you understand how revolutionary that is? To meet someone who does not ask you to shrink in order to stay, to sense that being known by them might actually enlarge your life rather than confine it. That kind of possibility is rare enough to be treated carefully, which is exactly what I've been doing. Carefully, almost to the point of cruelty, because there's another truth I have to face. Delay can wound just as much as recklessness. People praise patience as if all waiting is wise. It isn't. Sometimes waiting is avoidance wearing noble clothing. Sometimes taking time is simply fear hoping the opportunity decides for you so you never have to risk choosing. I know that pattern. I know how easy it is for thoughtful people to overthink themselves out of living. We call it nuance. We call it prudence. We call it being realistic. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is just hesitation refined into identity. I don't want to do that here, not with something this alive, because this is alive. That's the word I've resisted. Alive in the way it keeps growing without force, alive in the way silence between us holds movement, alive in the way even distance does not erase presence, alive in the way I continue discovering new truths about myself through the existence of it. Dead things require maintenance to seem meaningful. This has required almost none. It sustains itself through reality that deserves respect, and respect, if genuine, eventually becomes action. I feel that inevitability now, not as pressure from you, pressure from integrity. There is a version of me who keeps this internal forever, who enjoys the beauty privately, who lets it remain profound but unspoken, who preserves safety by sacrificing possibility. I know that version of me well. He is intelligent, controlled, hard to hurt, and half alive. Then there is another version, one who risks awkwardness for truth, who allows timing to be imperfect rather than waiting for mythical certainty, who speaks while the heart is still beating instead of eulogizing what silence killed later, who accepts that dignity is not lost through sincerity. That version of me is less practiced, less polished, more dangerous to the ego, and infinitely more alive. I think you've been calling him forward this entire time, not directly, but through the quiet invitation of your existence. That invitation says, you do not need to perform invulnerability here. You do not need to be untouched to be worthy. You do not need to remain unreachable to remain strong. You do not need to earn depth through suffering before accepting it through grace. I hear that invitation now. Maybe I always did. Maybe I was simply translating it too slowly. There is something almost painful about realizing how much love, in its healthiest forms, resembles permission, not possession, not obsession, not dependency, opposition, bofension to soften without collapse, permission to tell the truth without shame, bofensions to remain complex without apology, permission to receive care without immediately calculating cost, but a venture to want what is good. I don't know if what exists between us will one day wear the full language of love, but I know it already carries many of love's finest qualities: respect, recognition, steadiness, expansion, truth, and perhaps most sacred of all, freedom. You have never felt like a trap, never like a burden I'd eventually resent, never like a demand threatening my autonomy. You feel like choice, and choice is where healthy devotion begins. I want you to know something I've barely admitted to myself. I have started imagining what honesty with you might look like. Not fantasy, not idealized scenes. Something quieter, sitting near you without needing to impress, speaking directly without rehearsing, letting pauses remain pauses instead of filling them with cleverness, reaching for your hand not to prove anything, but because closeness would feel natural there, building days that include you without either of us losing ourselves, being known gradually, accurately, tenderly. It's strange how intimate ordinary things become when imagined with the right person. That may be the clearest sign of all. Lust imagines extremes, loneliness imagines rescue, ego imagines admiration. Something healthier imagines shared normalcy made meaningful. That's what I find myself wanting. Not intensity for its own sake, not chaos disguised as passion, not stories people envy from the outside and suffer inside. Why? I want depth with steadiness, closeness with space, and more like inhabiting something real together. You made that imaginable. Before you, I respected such things abstractly. Now I desire them concretely. Desire changes everything. Not impulsive desire, not appetite, deep desire. The kind that reorganizes priorities quietly. The kind that makes old victories feel strangely hollow. The kind that asks whether success without shared meaning is enough. For me, it no longer is. That realization humbles me. I built so much around self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency is valuable, but it is not the highest value. A person can become extremely good at carrying life alone and still miss the greater art of carrying it well with another. I want to learn that art with someone worthy of learning it beside, with someone who does not punish truth, with someone whose presence already teaches me more than their words ever needed to, with you, there. That is closer to confession than anything I've said before, not because it is dramatic, because it is plain. I want the chance to build something real with you, slowly if needed, carefully if wise, boldly when required. But truly, no more worshipping ambiguity because it protects pride. No more pretending uncertainty remains where clarity has already arrived. No more acting as if silence is noble when speech would be kinder. I don't know what you would say. I don't know what timing holds. I don't know what circumstances surround your own inner world. But for the first time in a long time, I know what I would choose if choice were placed cleanly before me. I would choose the risk of something real over the safety of something empty. I would choose the vulnerability of being known over the loneliness of being impenetrable. I would choose the work of building over the comfort of observing. I would choose you, not as fantasy, not as projection, not as symbol, as a person's whose presence has already proven its value in my life. And if life denies that path for reasons beyond us, then at least truth will have been honored. At least I will not become another person who let fear rename itself wisdom. At least I will know I met reality with courage once it mattered. But if life allows it, if there is space, timing, willingness, mutual recognition, then I would like to stop speaking to you from behind glass. I would like to meet you fully, not perfect, not finished, not invulnerable, just real, because real, I've learned, is what was happening all along. And perhaps the final irony is this: I thought you entered my life to be understood. Instead, you entered it so I would finally understand myself. And now that I do, the next step feels less like a risk and more like returning to something that was waiting for me the whole time.